Hello, and thank you for joining me for this paper, Choice, Chance, and the Database, Transforming Narrative Structures Through Combinatory and Generative Cinema. I want to consider how combinatory and generative structures can activate the viewer to participate in making meaning and imagining stories from images and narrative trajectories that are always in flux, in systems that are always changing the order of the material. In returning to images and events in changing contexts, the algorithms build works that suggest entanglements and correspondences to provoke questions of memory. The systems challenge the imagination to consider how different narrative possibilities emerge from parallel conditions. I will discuss how this works, how it varies from interactive models, and how synthesis may be achieved through multimodal approaches, bringing together elements of interactivity and algorithmically driven production. So what is combinatory cinema, which is also sometimes known as recombinatory cinema or database cinema? In combinatorial cinema, algorithms are used to combine text, images, and sound for database, making works that potentially are infinite in their variety. This is maybe not unlike the way a film editor may mix and match shots and sounds that are gathered into bins, imagining different possibilities that each image contains. But in this case, there is no answer print, and the human is not making the final decisions. In a different way, it's maybe also kind of like how a fortune teller imagines stories based on the arrangement of a set of tarot cards. So how does this work for narrative? To look at that, I'm going to introduce a 2016 work called Toxicity, a Climate Change Narrative, which is a film I also made with writer Scott Rettberg. The film follows 6 fictional characters who live in the near future with frequent hurricanes and rising seawater. It takes place in an industrial area where there are lots of brownfields and active petrochemical industries. So the film asks what life would be like in this highly toxic, flooded, contaminated landscape. So what's the structure of toxicity? Toxicity shuffles these narrative fragments based on beginnings, middles, and endings. Anecdotes themselves have upward arcs and downward arcs to create flows as they connect in the random system. These are intercut with the non-fiction anecdotes of the deaths, as well as musical segues. The diagram shows the simplest version, but usually we would recode this for each different event, which is another wonderful thing of working with the database. Not only is every screening different, but every time one shows it, one can change what's in the database or change the structure. So for example, sometimes we would change it to emphasize one character or another on each play. Here's an example again. I encourage you to look at the link to see it in live action form.
People have different opinions about what's happening down in the wash. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that those people are still American citizens, still human beings. I know the argument. They chose to hide out during the evacuations or to escape from the camps and go over the fences, and we can't take them back because of the danger of contamination. I understand how diseases spread if they don't get them under control. Don't get me wrong. I think those people are fools, and I understand the danger they pose. But they aren't rats.
The Pentagon takes some of our advice, but more often, they ignore it. It's a different situation now. FEMA used to be about helping people see their way through, about helping people rebuild. But with so many places wiped out and so many people suffering, FEMA can't help much. In the new regime, we're all about taking out the garbage, clearing the debris, sealing things off. The military deals with keeping order and restoring basic infrastructure. We coordinate the cleanup, we bulldoze the buildings, we get the bodies in body bags and ship them off to the morgue. We send teeth to the forensic dentists. Sometimes the teeth are all we have to send. Sometimes we needed to take a mobile crematorium on site to dispose of the contaminated cadavers. Those remains won't take care of themselves. They pose serious health risks. It's all about containment.
Irwin in Little Egg Harbor lived close to the canals in Mystic Island. He had diabetes and a heart condition and little mobility on account of a back injury. He poured the last few shots of wild turkey as his ex-wife begged him to leave with her and her fiancé, and settled down into his easy boy recliner as everybody left. He was drowned in the storm surge and was found face down in the muddy debris with his boots still on.
Toxicity gave a kind of structure of telling stories in which elements would be out of the user's control, and you would often discover curious correspondences in the conditions of people's lives, or people's observations would overlap around certain events that happened. And one tried to peg these in different ways, but it was fairly loosely done. In fact, the more randomness was often the better, because one of the exciting things of a combinatory form is how it teaches you to see things you don't expect. And as long as you work to certain constraints, sometimes simple mathematical constraints of length, of shot, moments of transition, kinds of transitions, in this case it arcs up and down in certain kinds of ways, those constraints often open up other kinds of interpretations. Penelope is a combinatorial film based on Homer's Odyssey. Penelope uses a combinatory system that writes 13 lines of a sonnet, then reverses the structure and writes another 13 to make a 26-line poem. With each line, the system pulls different sounds and images that are gathered using keywords into bins. After the 26 lines have been created by the system, the video poem is complete. The system puts up that poem, once and forever gone, and a new poem begins to be created.
When silence is my lover's only word, nothing for our livestock, no partners to mate. My man will be another woman's pet. I would render tame a restless centaur. In fulfillment of a prophetic bet. I would sit a vigil at Hades' door.
However, coming out of that project, I then teamed up with computational poet Nick Mumford and composer Adam Vidiksis. And we decided we'd try to do something a little bit different, where we would try to find ways where the immersive intensity of a combinatory form, which is always going beyond your control, which is always giving insight to machine devices behind the scene, the kind of forces that we all live by going on behind the scene, the systems of time, space, mechanization of our lives, that in a way become revealed in the structure of these works and the loss of control. And we were asked, well, how can we begin to build some control back? Find some ways to have choice making as well as that immersion. We built a project called The Floods, first under the title Altering Shores, which was set up for multiple screens. First in a gallery setting, which I'll show you a brief clip of how that's set up, using code that would create levels of intensity of materials that I had been gathering, first in Philadelphia and then around the world, intersected with research that would be streaming through as observation notes. But that text would start to become strangely repetitive, jumbled, transformed by contaminants, by extinctions, by events, quite beautifully coded by Nick Mumford, and start offshooting lines of text, of poetry, of contaminants, of extinctions. The text was generative, whereas the images are combinatory, so that actually the computer is making these words come together to make phrases, sentences, and statements. And the system draws on various kinds of materials that have been keyworded and sorted to build, in a sense, a musical sense of narrative, a sense of following the different tonal and modal changes as the work goes on. And these changes, we found, we'd soon begin to change not only by what we'd written into the code, but by feeds we could feed into the code, such as, say, the tidal movements or environmental data that would trigger sudden disruptions to what had already been programmed as a structure. Yeah, let's look at a little clip, and then I'll keep talking about it. So the image you just saw used an installation structure, but even in its first setup, the work often had more than just the installation. For example, with the first exhibition of Altering Shores, the audience members would mingle with live performers who themselves would have to respond to a film where they don't know what's going to happen, because it's combinatory, because it's generative, because things are always changing. They know there will be moments when ships come streaming across the stream, or when all four screens fill with contaminants, or when they will go underwater. But they don't know when that will happen, how that will happen, and they don't know what will happen in between, and even in those moments, what the images will be. So there's a strange improvisational act. The singers have to sing the words as they appear. And the crowd on the stage with the musicians and the vocalists find themselves following, almost like a wave caught in an ocean. Like we are, in a sense, often caught in these hyper objects of things like climate change, not knowing which way to turn. It comes from all sides. And it begins to build a kind of collectivity of action. We expanded that concept by then developing locative elements, where then people could follow maps also beyond the exhibition to locations where they would tie specific short video elements to a place that they could go or do go to, and begin to, in a way, lay claim again to place. We also worked in elements where sounds from cell phones would mingle with other sounds. If you had several users, they would start to create a collective symphony that would contribute to the overall soundscape. This took a very layered kind of compositional concept where each phone coming in at a different moment would still find its way to get integrated into the whole. And then, as I said, there would be live data elements which tie your experience, say, in a art setting to the environment around. For example, in the picture here of the exhibition at an industrial pier, we had hydrophones under the pier. And when disruptions would happen in the water under the pier, it would cause disruptions to the images above the pier. And you could feel, oh, there's something happening here that is below my feet that I cannot see, but now I can feel. And that also is trying to come to terms with these hyperobjects, these things we can't quite see, but we know it's happening, and we see only the residue, the side elements, and that are filtered. So it creates now a narrative approach in response, where there is working with constraints. One can have just a random combinatory work or generative work, but that doesn't, this can be interesting, but it doesn't get you necessarily anywhere beyond the first experience. But how do you actually begin to build something out of this? Well, that's finding the right path and constraints in the back structure. And hopefully, as this plays through, you begin to see something about the structures that are hidden, the structures of narrative, the structures by which we make links between images that now we're not even controlling how they go together, and yet we always desire, find, look for some kind of connection, especially in materials that have some intrinsic reason to be together, materials gathered by the filmmaker or the user, the participants, that are try to respond to a question. In this case, how do we survive through the legacies of the industrial revolution that have set up the paradigms underlying the things we struggle with today? Issues like climate change and extinction and mass violence. So the first step in this is a step of connecting experience to image, naming it, and then allowing stories to emerge. In each of these works currently that we're doing, the floods, the water here, and so forth, we add, each time we show the work, we add local material and have a local angle, because the nice thing too of a database working, you can change the code continually, and set that in context next to global issues so that we can also have a local reference to a global one, so that the narratives themselves are always taking on different twists and turns and hues to a local condition, which is also a particular advantage of this model. The approach in the end is multimodal. It's one where the combinatory work exists with other kinds of interaction and activity as a way of trying to experience the temporal conditions of choice on the fly, next to the more often thoughtful and distant choice making that happens with much of more established interactive film. I'm going to leave now with a short final piece from a short made that describes a little bit more about this project. Because the work itself is too large to show in this format well, but here's a short film, a kind of teaser we'd made, and we'll just show a little bit of it so you have a bit more of the feeling. Thank you.